Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It was a late Sunday afternoon, the kind that stretches long and quiet. The house was unusually still. My son had left earlier with his friends for a weekend trip, and I had planned to take the quiet as an excuse to get away myself. I'd packed a small overnight bag, watered the plants, and checked that the oven was off twice as always. The soft roll of luggage wheels across hardwood echoed in the empty hallway, and I washed halfway to the front door when the knock came. It was light but firm, unexpected. I paused, hand on the doorknob, and opened it to find someone I hadn't seen in a while. "Hey, Mrs. Callahan," he said. It took me a second to place the face, taller now, a little more filled out. The sharp jawline of someone stepping into adulthood. It was Daniel, my son's friend from high school. He used to be around all the time back, when they were inseparable, always polite, always with that gentle energy, but I hadn't seen him in years. Daniel, I blinked, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, yes, he hesitated, eyes flicking to the bag at me feet. "Are you going somewhere?" I glanced down and laughed, a little embarrassed. "Just for the night." "Nothing serious." He smiled a little awkwardly. "Sorry to bother you. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." "I didn't realize you'd be heading out." There was something tentative in his tone, something unsaid. I opened the door wider. "You can come in if you'd like." "I've got a few minutes." He stepped in, brushing past with a polite nod. He smelled faintly of soap and cologne, and his movements were careful, like he was trying not to take up too much space. The living room still had that early evening light spilling across the rug, warm and golden. I motioned for him to toss it, and I tucked the bag away out of sight. He sat on the edge of the couch like a guest who wasn't sure if they were staying. "You want tea or water?" "No, I'm okay." "Thank you," I said quickly, then looked down at his shins. I wasn't sure if I should come, but I guess I just needed to see a familiar face. I sat across from him, legs crossed, trying to read what was beneath the surface. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated, exhaled slowly. "I lost my mom this year." That hit me like a quiet punch to the chest. I hadn't heard. She and I weren't close, but we'd crossed paths at school events, chatted over PTA coffee tables. "Oh, Daniel," I said gently. "I'm so sorry." He nodded, eyes fixed on the coffee table. "It's been months, but some days it still feels like yesterday. I can't imagine," I said softly. "Grief has its own timeline. It never asks if you're ready." I looked up, and for the first time I saw how tired he looked. Not physically, but in that way people get when they've been carrying something alone for too long. I keep thinking about all the things I never got to say. Things I'll never get to ask. You don't realize how many of those there are until it's too late. There was silence between us then, gentle and heavy. I knew that silence. I'd lived inside it after losing my husband years ago. It was the kind that traps around you like a fog and makes the world feel slightly out of focus. You don't have to say everything I said, but I'm here if talking helps. His mouth curved slightly. "You always had this calm energy, even back when we were teenagers running wild through your house." I laughed softly. "That's because I knew someday you'd leave, and I'd miss the chaos." His smile faded a little. "I guess I came because this place still feels safe." Reached across and touched his hand. It was a simple gesture, maternal maybe, but something in the way he looked at Methan made the air feel a little different. Charged somehow. Not inappropriate, not romantic, but personal. Raw. "You're not alone in feeling lost," I said. His hand didn't pull away. "I didn't think I'd miss her this much or need someone to talk to about it. You can always talk to me." We stay light. That for a few quiet moments. Just hands, just eyes, just shared space. And I realized something in that silence. There's power in being present for Somyeon and holding space without needing to fix or judge. When he finally stood to leave, Hal looked lighter, even if just by a little. "Thank you," he said at the door, "for opening it, for listening. Anytime." Daniel, truly, after he left, I didn't feel much like going on my little trip anymore. Instead, I made myself tea, curled up in the spot where he'd been sitting, and thought about how often we walk past people who are quietly unraveling, and how sometimes the most unexpected knocks are the ones we need most, not for answers, but for connection. The next morning was overcast, and the sky outside my kitchen window matched the mood I carried with me. Quiet, reflective, unsettled in a strange but not unpleasant way. I kept thinking about Daniel, about the way he had looked at me, about the weight of Wath shared. There was a vulnerability in him that I hadn't seen before. He wasn't that lanky teenager lounging in me kitchen anymore. He was a man now, grieving, raw, reaching out to someone who on Sarah presented comfort in his life. I could still feel the lingering touch of his hand in mine. It hadn't been romantic exactly, but it hadn't been anything either. By noon, I'd unpacked a small overnight bag I never ended up using and started a load of laundry I hadn't planned to do. I was folding towels when my phone buzzed with AIM Sage. "Daniel, I hope it's okay to text. Can I stop by again later? There's something I didn't get to say yesterday." I stared at the message for a moment. My heart tugged between curiosity and hesitation, but I replied simply, "Me? Of course, I'll be home." He came by just after 5, just as the day was beginning to wind down. I made a pot of coffee instead of tea this time, and he accepted a cup without the nervousness he carried. The day before we sat across from each other again, this time at the dining table. "I didn't mean to take up your time," he began. "You're not?" I interrupted gently. "It's good to see you." He nodded, gripping Themig with both hands. Yesterday, that was the first time I have said any of that out loud. I didn't even talk to my dad about it. Sometimes it's easier with someone a little removed from the pain, I said. I nodded again. "Yeah, and I think I've always felt safe here with you." He said it so matter-of-factly that it caught me off guard. His eyes held mine, steady and sincere. "I used to come over when we were in high school, not just because of your son," headed quietly. "It was the way you talk it to us. Like we mattered, like we weren't just dumb kids." I smiled softly. "You weren't dumb kids, just loud that made him laugh." But it faded quickly into something more serious. "I didn't just come yesterday to talk about my mom," he said. "I came because I've been feeling stuck, and I thought maybe talking to you would help me figure things out." I tilted my head, watching him closely. "Figure out what?" He exhaled slowly. "Who I am now, who I want to be. I feel like I've been going through the motions for years. Work, gym, repeat. And now, after losing her, I'm realizing how little of it feels real." That stirred something deep in me. I remembered that feeling too after my husband passed. How the days pulled together and nothing felt anchored. The world moved on, but I didn't. "You're grieving more than your mother," I said gently. "You're grieving version of your life that no longer exists." He looked at me then with an intensity I hadn't expected. "How did you get through it after your husband?" I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands folded on the table. I let myself fall apart. I said honestly, I cried in the laundry room. I screamed into pillows. I walked around the block in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep. And then one day I made coffee and it didn't taste like ash. That's when I knew I was still alive. Daniel's expression softened. "That skinned beautiful no, it was messy." I chuckled. "But real. And I think that's what you're craving, isn't it? Something real." He nodded. Then after a pause, he said quietly, "Is This real, sitting here with you? I felt my breath catch for ammoment. It was such a simple question, yet it echoed in the deepest part of me. Yes, I said, this is real. He smiled gently, gratefully. Then he stood, but didn't move to leave. Instead, he walked around the table and stood beside me. I looked up at him, my heart beating in a way that reminded me of another lifetime. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to, but I saw it in his eyes. Connection, respect, a longing to be understood, and something else, something that would unfold only if we let it. I should go, he said quietly. I nodded. Okay. He paused at the door again, the same way he had the day before. I meant what I said, he added. This matters. Then he left. And I stood in the doorway for a long while, staring at the space he just filled. Somewhere in the silence, I realized that the story unfolding between us wasn't about filling the holes left by grief. It was about discovering who we were when the silence finally settled, and what we were brave enough to say once it did. The days that followed were soft and strange. I found myself carrying Daniel's words with me through the simplest tasks, watering the ferns on the porch, folding clothes, standing at the sink with warm water running over my hands longer than needed. Is this real? He had asked. And somehow that question clung to everything now. It wasn't about romance. Not really. It was about being seen in a new way. About Simeon looking at you and acknowledging just who you were, but who you still could be. And maybe that's what had startled me most. At my age, I thought Ick knew the shape of my world. Yet here he was reshaping it. 3 days after his last visit, he texted again. Daniel, I'd like to bring you something. Can I come by? Didn't hesitate. Me. Of course. He arrived just after 7, holding a flat brown paper wrapped package. His jacket was damp with mist. And early spring drizzle had begun outside, and his hair was slightly disheveled, which only made him look more boyish. This is for you, he said, handing me the package. I opened it carefully. Inside was a sketch, delicate pencilings, soft shading. It was me, sitting at my kitchen table, a mug in hand, gazing slightly away as though lost in Amory. The likeness was uncanny, but it was more than that. He'd captured something deeper. Thoughtfulness, strength, maybe even sorrow. I didn't speak for a moment. I just looked at it, felt the weight of it settle into my chest. You drew this from memory? I asked. He nodded. I wanted to remember you as you were that day. Quiet, strong, real. Something welled in my throat, warm and unexpected. I looked at him. This young man with his quiet voice and eyes full of something I couldn't quite name. I don't think anyone's ever seen me like that, it whispered. He stepped closer, his voice just as soft. Then they weren't really looking. It would have been easy to step away thin to make tea, to change the subject. That something in me had shifted. I don't want to retreat behind polite conversation. Daniel, I said, his name filling that space between us like a question and an answer. He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited gently as if he understood that this wasn't a moment to rush. I didn't know what this is, I continued. But I know it's not just comfort. It's not just nostalgia. I know, he said. It's not simple, but it's honest. We stood in silence for a few heartbeats, and then slowly he reached out. His hand hovered for a moment, then gently rested on my arm. You make me feel steady, he said. Like I didn't have to pretend. His touch wasn't demanding. It was grounding, and in it I felt the truth of what had been building. Not passion, not fantasy, but something rare. Emotional safety. I stepped in just slightly, not avenging him, but close enough to share a breath. This is unfamiliar ground for both of us, I murmured. Then we walk carefully, he replied. I looked up into his face, and I saw no uncertainty. Just patience, just presence. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't feel the need to guard me. Heart, We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The intimacy was in the pause, the permission, the promise not to run from what was beginning. When he left the evening, the sketch still in my hands, he turned back at the door and said, "You don't have to decide anything tonight. I just needed you to know how deeply this matters to me." And after he walked away into the foggy night, I stood there with the door open, the spring air curling around my ankles, wondering how something so unexpected could feel so right. Maybe connection doesn't always come in grand gestures. Maybe it arrives in quiet drawings, open hands, and conversations that change the rhythm of your breathing. The next morning, I woke to soft sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor. For once, the air felt a little lighter, like the weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying had shifted. I lay in bed longer than usual, the sketched in alcove me resting on the nightstand beside a half-read book and my glasses. I hadn't framed it or tucked it away. I needed to see it. I needed it near. I thought of his words again. "You make me feel steady," and how they echoed something I hadn't dared speak aloud. How around him I felt seen without explanation, not flattered, not flirted with, just recognized. That kind of emotional clarity doesn't come often, especially not after so many years of silence and survival. Later that afternoon, I sat in the sunroom, coffee in hand, turning the sketch over once more, and then, as if summoned by thought, I heard the familiar knock-top. This time I didn't feel the usual flicker of surprise. I just smiled and opened the door. He stood there, casual and unsure all at once, a brown bag hanging loosely in one hand. "I brought pasteurized," he said. "From that place he used to take us after school." I laughed softly and stepped aside. "Now you're just tugging at my nostalgia." "I'm working every angle," he joked, but a lightness in his eyes was real. We moved to the kitchen where everything felt familiar but charged. The kettle hissed gently, the plates clinked softly, and we settled into the kind off rhythm two people fall into when they've stopped pretending. "Can I ask you something honest?" I said after a while, tearing a piece off croissant apart with deliberate fingers. "You always can." He looked at me seriously. "Do you think this, whatever this is, makes sense to anyone but us?" The question sat between us, vulnerable and unwrapped. "No," I said. "And that's why it matters." His shoulders relaxed like he'd been holding his breath for days. He leaned back in his chair, hands in his lap. "I keep thinking about how people try to assign rules to relationships," he said. "What should happen? Who should matter? What's appropriate?" But none of those rules ever helped me when I was falling apart. "They're written by people who are afraid," I said. "Afraid to feel anything they can't control." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression soft and open. "I'm not afraid with you. That's what's different." I felt that truth settle into my bones. There was no urgency, no pressure to define or fix, just a shared understanding that something was growing slow, gently between us. Later, we moved to the living room, the same spot where we'd first spoken after his knock that day. This time we sat closer, not touching, just near enough that our arms occasionally brushed, and when they did, I didn't move away. He reached into his bag again and pulled out something else, a small envelope. "I didn't plan to give you this. I wrote it after I saw you the first time," Hesed. I took it with both hands, unfolded it slowly. It was a letter, a handwritten, slightly messy, deeply personal letter. In it, he spoke of his mother, of the hollow spaces grief left bedden, of the confusion he felt seeing the world keep spinning while he was still emotionally standing still. And then he wrote about me. He wrote about memories I'd forgotten. Me handing him a towel when he spilled juice at 13, telling him it was okay to mess up, sometimes stopped me scolding the boys gently for leaving shoes everywhere, but then laughing about it once they were gone. Me always listening, always present, You were the first adult who ever made him feel like I wasn't a problem, you wrote. I blinked fast to hold back the tears, folding the letter again with hands that trembled. I didn't know I'd had that kind of impact. I said, finally, I don't think you ever do. He replied, when you're the one holding others up. We sat in the late afternoon light, a shared silence blooming between you a second, not heavy this time, but warm. Hadn't moved closer. He didn't have to. His presence was steady, like he said, like I needed, eventually. I turned to him. Daniel, I don't know where this goes, and I'm not rushing to give it a name, but I know it's honest. I know it's kind, and I know it's helped me feel it again. He smiled, a quiet kind of joy behind it. Then let's not name it. Let's just keep showing up for it, and that's what wedded. That night, he stayed a little longer than before. We talked about music, books we hadn't finished, food we wished we could cook, and when he finally left, he touched my hand one last time, just for a moment. No promises, just presence, after the door closed behind him. I sat back on the couch, letter in hand, sketch still nearby, and I let myself feel the beauty of the moment. In life, we often expect love or even healing to come in big cinematic waves. But to me, times it arrives in quiet knocks at door and conversations that outlast coffee and letters tucked into brown paper bags. And if you're lucky, sometimes it arrives just when you're about to leave, reminding you that you're not finished feeling yet, that there's still more life to live, more a connection to hold, more chapters waiting to be written.